Mara's hands were shaking before the doors even opened. She stood at the back of the great hall, pressed between two women she barely knew, and she could feel her own heartbeat pounding against her ribs like something trying to escape. In a few minutes, her sister would walk down that aisle and take a bond mark from the one man Mara had quietly loved for 3 years. Nobody in that hall knew what it cost her to stand there and smile. Nobody needed to know. The hall itself was beautiful, carved from old stone and lit by hundreds of small lanterns that hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. Long banners in deep green and silver, the colors of the Ashwood pack, hung along the walls. Flowers filled every corner, white and gold, chosen because they were Elise's favorite. Mara had helped pick them out herself, 2 weeks earlier, without once letting her voice shake. She remembered that afternoon clearly. Elise had been laughing, holding up different flowers against the light, asking which ones looked best near candles. Mara had agreed with everything, nodded at every choice, and said yes, that one is perfect, at least 4 times. She had practiced, in the mirror that night, how to look happy. She was good at practicing. She had been doing it for years. Now the moment had finally arrived, and Mara realized that no amount of practice could prepare a person for watching the person they loved choose someone else in front of an entire community. A soft drumbeat began, low and steady, rolling through the hall like a heartbeat of its own. The crowd quieted. Mara felt the woman beside her straighten up, eager, excited. Weddings in the pack were rare and sacred events, especially one between an alpha and his chosen mate. People had traveled from smaller packs nearby just to witness it. Some had brought gifts. Some had brought their children, lifting them onto their shoulders so they could see over the crowd. Mara had brought nothing but a carefully built wall around her heart. She looked toward the front of the hall, where Kian stood waiting. He wore a dark green coat, fitted perfectly to his broad shoulders, his dark hair combed back neatly for the occasion. He looked calm. He looked certain. He looked like a man who had never once doubted his choice. Mara remembered the way he used to look at her, back before any of this began. Small moments, a private joke shared across a crowded room, a hand briefly resting on her shoulder after a long training session. She had convinced herself those moments meant something. She had been wrong, and the wrongness of it had settled into her chest like a stone she couldn't set down. The doors at the far end of the hall creaked open, and every head turned at once. Elise stepped through the doorway wearing a soft ivory dress that moved like water around her legs. Her pale blonde hair was braided with small white flowers, and her face held the kind of nervous, radiant joy that only comes once in a person's life. She looked beautiful. She looked happy, and Mara, standing at the back of the room, felt her own throat tighten with a grief she had no right to name out loud. She was the older sister. She was supposed to be proud. She was proud, somewhere underneath everything else, but the pride sat tangled up with something darker, something that made her chest ache every time Elise smiled. As Elise walked slowly down the aisle, guests reached out gently to touch her sleeve, murmuring blessings, wishing her well. Mara stayed where she was, near the back wall, her arms folded tightly across her stomach, as if she could hold herself together by force alone. She thought about the day Kian had announced his choice. It had happened suddenly, without warning, during a pack gathering meant for something else entirely. He had stood before everyone and said Elise's name, and the crowd had erupted into cheers, before Mara even had time to process what she'd heard. She remembered forcing her hands to clap along with everyone else. She remembered smiling so hard her face ached by the end of the night. Nobody had asked her how she felt. Why would they? Nobody knew there was anything to ask about. Elise reached the front of the hall now, and Kian took her hands gently in his. Their eyes met, and for a moment the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. This was it. This was the beginning of the ceremony that would bond them together, formally, permanently, under pack law and tradition. The pack elder stepped forward, an older woman with silver hair and a calm, steady voice that carried easily across the quiet room. She began speaking about loyalty, about partnership, about the strength that comes from choosing someone and being chosen in return. Mara heard the words, but they blurred together, distant and muffled, like she was listening from underwater. She focused instead on breathing, in, out, slow and even. She told herself this would be over soon. She told herself she could survive one evening. She had survived worse. And then, without warning, everything changed. A strange sensation moved through the room, subtle at first, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. Mara felt it low in her stomach, a pull she didn't understand, sudden and impossible to ignore. Her skin prickled, her heart, which had already been pounding, now slammed against her ribs in a completely different rhythm. She turned her head toward the entrance without meaning to, as if her body had decided on its own that something important was happening there. The tall wooden doors at the back of the hall stood open, and a man stood framed in the doorway, backlit by the fading evening light outside. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that fell loosely across his forehead, and eyes that, even from this distance, seemed to catch every bit of light in the room. He was a stranger. Mara was certain of that. She had grown up in this pack, had spent her whole life memorizing faces, and this man belonged to none of them. But the pull she felt had nothing to do with familiarity. It hit her like a wave rising from the ocean floor, ancient and unstoppable, rolling straight through her chest. Her breath caught. Her vision seemed to narrow until the only thing she could see clearly was him, standing there, still as stone, staring directly at her. She knew, in that instant, exactly what was happening, even though every rational part of her mind tried to argue against it. The pull, the recognition, the sudden, overwhelming certainty that the universe had just rearranged itself around one single point. He was her true mate. The realization crashed through her so hard that she actually took a step back, bumping into the woman beside her, who shot her an annoyed glance before following her gaze toward the door. Within seconds, more heads were turning. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd like wind moving through tall grass. At the front of the hall, the pack elder faltered mid-sentence, her calm voice breaking off in confusion. Kian's head snapped up, his expression shifting from solemn concentration to sharp alertness. Elise, still holding his hands, turned to see what everyone else was staring at. The stranger did not wait for permission. He stepped into the hall, his boots echoing against the stone floor, and began walking forward with a slow, deliberate purpose that made the crowd part instinctively around him. He never looked away from Mara, not once. Mara felt frozen in place, her body caught somewhere between the urge to run and the overwhelming pull to move toward him. Every instinct she had ever trained herself to control was screaming at her now, refusing to be quieted. Somewhere behind her, a voice muttered, "That's a mate bond. That's an actual mate bond happening right now, in the middle of the ceremony." Another voice, hushed and disbelieving, answered, "During Kian's bonding? Now? Whose bond is that?" Mara didn't have to wonder who they meant. She could feel every eye in the room shifting toward her, could feel the heat rising in her face, as the reality of the moment settled over her like a heavy cloak. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not tonight. Not ever, if she was being honest with herself. She had long since stopped believing a true mate existed for her at all. The stranger stopped a few feet away, close enough now that she could see the exact shade of his eyes, a deep, warm brown that seemed to hold both surprise and something like relief. His jaw was tense, his shoulders squared, as if he too was fighting to stay in control of himself. "I felt it the moment I crossed into pack territory," he said, his voice low but carrying easily through the silent hall. "I didn't expect to find it here, not like this." Mara opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat had closed around every possible sentence she might have said. At the front of the hall, Kian's expression had darkened considerably. He released Elise's hands and took a step forward, his voice sharp with authority. "Who are you? This is a private ceremony. State your name and your reason for interrupting it." The stranger finally tore his gaze away from Mara, long enough to address Kian directly, though his body remained angled toward her, as if some invisible thread refused to let him turn away completely. "My name is Rhett," he said calmly, despite the tension crackling through the room. "I lead the Blackridge Pack, 2 territories north of here. I arrived tonight under a formal invitation to discuss trade agreements between our packs. I had no intention of disrupting anything." He paused, and for the first time, something almost apologetic crossed his face. "But I cannot ignore what just happened. None of us can." The hall had gone completely silent now, save for the faint crackling of the lanterns overhead. Elise stood frozen at the front, her hands still half raised from where Kian had released them, her wide eyes moving rapidly between her sister and the stranger who had just claimed, in front of everyone, that he had found his mate. Mara felt the weight of every stare pressing down on her. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the stone floor and vanish from the hall entirely. But some deeper part of her, the part connected to whatever ancient instinct had just recognized this stranger as hers, refused to let her look away from him. The pack elder, still visibly shaken, raised a hand to calm the murmuring crowd. "Everyone, please. Let us handle this with dignity." She turned toward Mara, her expression gentle but firm. "Child, is this true? Do you feel the bond?" Mara's mouth was dry. She swallowed hard, aware that her answer would change everything, not just for herself, but for her sister, for Kian, for the entire ceremony unfolding around her. "Yes," she whispered, and then, forcing her voice louder, so the whole hall could hear, "Yes, I feel it." The words seemed to echo forever in the sudden hush that followed. Kian's jaw tightened visibly. He looked from Mara to Rhett, and something unreadable passed behind his eyes, something that might have been surprise, or perhaps something closer to guilt. Elise, still standing beside him in her ivory dress, pressed a trembling hand to her chest, staring at her sister, as though seeing her for the first time in years. "Mara," Elise said softly, her voice cracking slightly. "You never said anything." Mara wanted to explain, wanted to tell her sister that none of this had been planned, that she hadn't asked for any of it to happen tonight of all nights, in the middle of a ceremony meant to be Elise's most important moment. But before she could find the words, the pack elder raised her voice again, addressing the crowd with practiced authority. "This ceremony cannot continue under these circumstances," she announced. "A true mate bond, once revealed, must be acknowledged according to our laws. We will pause these proceedings while the situation is properly addressed." A wave of murmurs swept through the hall, some sympathetic, some clearly scandalized. Mara barely registered any of it. Her focus kept drifting back to Rhett, who stood quietly beside her now, his presence radiating a kind of calm steadiness that felt strangely grounding amid the chaos. "I am sorry," he said quietly, only for her to hear. "I never meant to cause you trouble, but I could not pretend I didn't feel what just happened between us." Mara looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of deception or manipulation, and found none. Only sincerity, and a quiet kind of wonder, as if he too was still absorbing the shock of the moment. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything right now," Rhett replied gently. "But I would like the chance to know you, when you're ready. Not tonight, not like this." Around them, the hall had begun to shift into confused motion, guests whispering to one another, some already moving toward the doors, uncertain whether the celebration was truly over. Mara caught sight of Elise being led gently aside by two of her closest friends, her face pale with shock, tears glistening but not yet falling. Kian remained near the front of the hall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched Mara and Rhett standing together. For a brief moment, his eyes met Mara's, and something passed between them, something heavy with unspoken history. Then he turned away, his attention shifting back to Elise, guiding her carefully toward a side chamber where they could speak privately. Mara felt Rhett's presence beside her, like an anchor amid the swirling confusion. She didn't understand it yet, didn't know how to process the sudden and undeniable pull she felt toward a man she had met only minutes ago. But something in her chest, long closed off and guarded, had cracked open just slightly, letting in a sliver of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The pack elder approached them both, her expression calm but serious. "This situation requires careful handling," she said. "Tomorrow, we will speak properly, all of us together, to determine how to move forward. Tonight, I suggest everyone take time to breathe and reflect." Mara nodded numbly, still trying to process the whirlwind of the last several minutes. Rhett inclined his head respectfully toward the elder, before turning back to Mara one final time. "Until tomorrow then," he said softly. "I will not push you, but I am not going anywhere." As he stepped back, giving her space, Mara felt the loss of his nearness, almost immediately, a strange, hollow ache settling where his presence had just been. She watched him walk toward the guest quarters set aside for visiting pack members, his broad shoulders steady, his stride confident despite the chaos he had just walked into. Around her, the hall continued to empty slowly, guests whispering in small clusters as they made their way toward the doors. Mara remained rooted to her spot near the back wall, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. Hours ago, she had been preparing herself to watch her sister bond with the man she had loved in silence for years. Now, everything had changed, and she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She glanced toward the side chamber where Kian and Elise had disappeared, wondering what conversation was unfolding behind those closed doors, wondering how deeply tonight's events would reshape all of their lives moving forward. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara allowed herself to feel something other than quiet, practiced heartbreak. It was fragile, uncertain, and utterly overwhelming, but it was there, undeniable, glowing faintly in her chest, like a candle, refusing to be extinguished. Whatever tomorrow held, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. She walked out of the hall alone, into the cool night air, and looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky, wondering how a single evening could hold so much heartbreak and so much unexpected possibility all at once. Behind her, the great hall stood quiet and empty, its lanterns still glowing softly. The flowers she had helped choose 2 weeks earlier, now witnesses to a story none of them could have predicted. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, painful truths, and choices that would shape the rest of her life. Tonight, though, Mara allowed herself simply to breathe, to feel the cool air fill her lungs, and to wonder, for the first time in years, what it might feel like to be chosen first. Sleep did not come easily that night. Mara lay awake in her small room above the Pax herb store, staring at the ceiling, while her mind replayed every second of the ceremony over and over. She kept seeing Rhett's eyes locking onto hers across the crowded hall, kept feeling that strange, undeniable pull settle low in her chest each time she closed her eyes. She thought about Elise, about the hurt and confusion on her sister's face, and guilt twisted sharply inside her, even though she knew none of tonight's events had been her doing. She hadn't asked for a true mate bond to interrupt her sister's ceremony. She hadn't asked for any of this. And yet, some small, quiet part of her, one she barely recognized, felt something close to relief. For years, she had convinced herself she would never feel this kind of connection with anyone. She had watched Kian choose her sister, and told herself that was simply her fate, to always be the one standing quietly in the background while others found their happiness. Now, everything she believed about her own future had been thrown into question by a stranger's steady gaze, and a pull she couldn't explain or deny. She finally drifted into an uneasy sleep sometime near dawn, her dreams filled with warm brown eyes and unanswered questions, and when she woke a few hours later, the sun already climbing steadily into the sky, she knew that whatever conversations waited for her that day would change the course of her life completely. She rose slowly, dressed in simple clothes, and stepped outside into the cool morning air, bracing herself for whatever came next. The Pack meeting hall looked completely different in the morning light. Gone were the lanterns and flowers from the night before. In their place stood rows of simple wooden benches, arranged in a wide circle around a raised platform, where the Pack elder and senior members would sit to discuss matters of importance. Mara arrived early, her stomach twisted into knots, and took a seat near the edge of the circle, where she could watch the door without drawing too much attention. She had barely slept, and it showed. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. She kept running through everything she might say, every explanation she might offer, though she wasn't entirely sure what she needed to explain. She hadn't done anything wrong. She reminded herself of that fact over and over, though the guilt sitting heavy in her chest refused to listen to reason. Other Pack members began filing in slowly, whispering among themselves as they took their seats. Word of the previous night's events had clearly spread through the entire territory by now. Mara caught fragments of conversation as people passed, some sympathetic, some curious, a few outright judgmental. Can you imagine? Right in the middle of the ceremony, I heard the stranger walk straight up to her, didn't even wait to be introduced. Poor Elise, what a thing to happen on her own bonding day. Mara kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the whispers pull her attention away. She focused instead on steadying her breathing, on keeping her expression calm despite the storm raging inside her. When Rhett entered the hall a few minutes later, the room seemed to shift again, the same strange pull from the night before, settling low in Mara's stomach the moment he stepped through the doorway. She looked up instinctively, and their eyes met across the crowded room. He offered her a small, careful nod, respectful and restrained, before taking a seat near the front, close enough to be part of the discussion, but far enough to give her space. Kian and Elise arrived together shortly after, and Mara felt her chest tighten at the sight of them. Elise looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, though she held her chin high as she walked to her seat. Kian's expression remained carefully neutral, though tension radiated from his shoulders as he took his place beside her. The pack elder rose from her seat at the front of the hall, raising a hand to quiet the murmuring crowd. Her name was Ophelia, and she had led the pack's council for over 20 years, respected by everyone for her steady wisdom and fairness. "We gather this morning to address what occurred during last night's ceremony," Ophelia began, her voice calm but firm enough to command full attention. "A true mate bond is one of the most sacred connections our kind can experience. It cannot be ignored, denied, or set aside, regardless of the circumstances surrounding its discovery." She turned her gaze toward Mara, her expression gentle. "Mara, please stand and share what you experienced last night, in your own words, so the council may understand the situation fully." Mara's legs felt unsteady as she rose from the bench, every eye in the hall now fixed on her. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I felt a pull," she said slowly. "The moment he walked through the doors, something inside me recognized him immediately. I've never felt anything like it before. I didn't plan for this to happen, and I certainly never intended to disrupt my sister's ceremony. But I cannot deny what I felt." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, though Ophelia raised her hand again to restore silence. "Thank you, Mara. Please, sit." She turned next toward Rhett, who rose calmly from his seat, his posture steady and composed, despite the weight of every gaze upon him. "I arrived last night for a scheduled diplomatic visit," Rhett explained. "I had no knowledge of the ceremony taking place, nor any expectation of finding my mate here. The moment I crossed into pack territory, I felt the pull, growing stronger with every step closer to the hall. By the time I reached the doors, I could not have ignored it even if I had wanted to." He paused, glancing briefly at Mara before continuing. "I understand the difficulty this creates, particularly for Elise and Kian, and I offer my sincere apology for the disruption caused. But a true mate bond is not something either of us chose. It simply exists, undeniable, the moment it reveals itself." Ophelia nodded slowly, considering his words. "This council recognizes the sanctity of true mate bonds under our laws. Such bonds cannot be denied, nor can they be forced upon anyone against their will. Mara, the choice of whether to pursue this bond remains entirely yours. No one, not this council, not tradition, not even Rhett himself, has the right to demand you accept it." Mara felt a strange mixture of relief and pressure settle over her at those words. The freedom to choose felt like a gift, but it also meant the weight of the decision rested entirely on her own shoulders. Kian rose next, his expression carefully controlled, though Mara could see the tension in the set of his jaw. "I would like to address the council as well," he said. "Last night's ceremony was meant to formalize my bond with Elise. While I understand the significance of a true mate bond, I believe we should proceed with completing our own ceremony as soon as reasonably possible, once emotions have settled." Elise, seated beside him, nodded in agreement, though her eyes flickered briefly toward Mara with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. Something between hurt and confusion, perhaps even a flicker of something closer to relief, though Mara couldn't be certain. Ophelia considered this for a long moment before responding. "That seems reasonable, provided both parties remain in agreement moving forward. We will allow a period of adjustment before any further ceremonies take place, out of respect for everyone involved." The meeting continued for a while longer, addressing practical matters, the logistics of Rhett's continued presence in pack territory, arrangements for him to properly court Mara according to pack customs should she choose to pursue the bond. Mara listened numbly, her mind still struggling to process the sheer scale of change unfolding around her. When the meeting finally concluded, the hall slowly emptied, small clusters of pack members lingering to discuss what they had just witnessed. Mara remained seated for a long moment, gathering the strength to stand, when a familiar voice spoke softly beside her. "Can we talk?" She looked up to find Elise standing there, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, looking younger and more uncertain than Mara had seen her look in years. "Of course," Mara said quietly, rising to her feet. The two sisters walked together out of the hall, away from the lingering crowd, until they reached a quiet garden behind the meeting building, where they had spent countless childhood afternoons, playing among the flower beds. The garden looked much the same as it always had, though the silence between them now felt heavier than Mara could ever remember. "I had no idea," Elise finally said, breaking the silence. "About your feelings for Kian, I mean. If I had known, I never would have accepted his choice so quickly." Mara felt her chest tighten painfully. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly. "I never told anyone. I didn't want to make things difficult, and honestly, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself I would be happy for you no matter what, and I tried to be." "But you weren't," Elise said, not unkindly, simply stating the truth they both already knew. Mara looked down at her hands, unable to meet her sister's eyes. "No," she admitted quietly, "I wasn't. But that's not something you need to carry guilt over. You didn't do anything wrong, Elise. You fell in love with someone, and he chose you. That's not a crime." Elise reached out and took her sister's hand, squeezing it gently. "I still wish you had told me. We used to tell each other everything." "I know," Mara said, her voice cracking slightly. "I think I was scared. Scared that saying it out loud would make it real, and then I'd have to actually face losing him. It felt easier to just pretend." The two sisters stood together in the quiet garden for a long moment, the weight of years of unspoken feelings finally settling into the open air between them. It wasn't a complete resolution, not yet, but it was a start, a small crack in the wall that had unknowingly begun to form between them. "What are you going to do?" Elise asked eventually. "About Rhett, I mean." Mara let out a long breath, looking up at the sky above the garden. "I don't know yet. Everything happened so fast. I need time to think, to understand what I actually feel, separate from everything else going on." Elise nodded slowly. "That seems fair. Just promise me something." "What?" "Promise you won't let fear make this decision for you. Whatever you choose it because it's what you actually want, not because you're scared of getting hurt again." Mara managed a small, genuine smile, the first one that had felt real in longer than she could remember. "I'll try." The sisters embraced briefly before parting ways, each returning to their own thoughts and uncertainties. Mara wandered slowly back toward her small room, her mind spinning with everything that had happened over the past day. The council's decision echoed in her thoughts, the freedom to choose settling over her like both a blessing and an enormous weight. She spent the remainder of the afternoon alone, walking through the quiet forest paths surrounding the pack's territory, trying to sort through the tangled mess of emotions inside her. Grief over the loss of a future she had once quietly imagined. Confusion over the sudden, undeniable pull toward a complete stranger. A cautious, fragile hope that maybe, despite everything, something good could come from all this chaos. As evening approached, she found herself standing at the edge of a small clearing, overlooking the valley below, the setting sun painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She hadn't heard footsteps approaching, but somehow she knew, before she even turned around, exactly who had found her. "I hope I'm not intruding," Rhett said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. Mara turned to face him, studying his features in the fading light. He looked less imposing now than he had in the crowded hall, his shoulders relaxed, his expression open and patient. "You're not," she said softly. "I was just thinking." "About the bond?" "About everything," she admitted. "It's a lot to process in such a short amount of time." Rhett nodded understandingly, taking a few careful steps closer, though he stopped well before crossing into her personal space. "I don't expect you to have any answers right now. I meant what I said last night. I'm not going anywhere, and I won't pressure you into anything you're not ready for." Mara studied him carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity in his words, and found none. "Why did you come looking for me tonight?" "Honestly?" He offered a small, almost boyish smile that softened the sharp lines of his face. "I wanted to see you again, not to ask for anything, just to see you. Is that strange?" Despite everything weighing on her heart, Mara felt the corner of her mouth lift slightly. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think it's strange at all." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light of the sun disappear behind the distant hills, And for the first time since the ceremony had been interrupted, Mara felt something close to peace settle over her, however fragile and uncertain it might be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new decisions to be made, but tonight, standing quietly beside a stranger, who somehow felt less like a stranger with every passing minute, Mara allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, without fear, without guilt, and without the weight of expectations she had carried for far too long. 3 days passed before Mara agreed to spend real time with Rhett, away from the watchful eyes of the Pack Council, and the constant whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she walked. She had spent those 3 days working through her feelings as carefully as she could, talking things over with Elise late into the evenings, walking alone through the forest when she needed silence more than conversation. By the 4th morning, she found herself standing at the edge of the Pack's northern border, waiting for Rhett to arrive for their first proper meeting. He had suggested a walk along the river that separated Ashwood territory from the neutral lands beyond, somewhere quiet, somewhere they could talk without an audience. He arrived exactly on time, dressed simply in dark clothing that suited the forest surroundings far better than the formal coat he had worn during the ceremony. He greeted her with a warm, careful smile, one that seemed to ask permission rather than assume welcome. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said, as they began walking along the riverbank together, the water rushing gently beside them, sunlight filtering down through the canopy above. "I wanted to," Mara admitted. "I've had a lot of time to think, and I realized hiding from this wasn't going to make it any easier to understand." "That's a fair point," Rhett said, glancing sideways at her. "So, where would you like to start? I'm an open book, ask me anything." Mara considered the question for a moment, before deciding on honesty. "Tell me about your pack, about your life before all of this happened." Rhett nodded, seeming pleased by the question. "Blackridge is smaller than Ashwood, tucked further into the mountains. My father led the pack before me, and when he passed, the responsibility fell to me sooner than I expected. I was only 23 at the time." "That's young to take on so much responsibility," Mara said softly. "It was," he agreed. "There were difficult years, learning how to lead, earning the trust of pack members who had known me my whole life, as simply the Alpha's son, rather than the Alpha himself. But we found our footing eventually. The pack is strong now, and I'm proud of what we've built together." "And your true mate?" Mara asked carefully. "Had you given up hope of finding them?" Rhett let out a quiet breath, considering his answer. "Mostly yes. It's been over 10 years since I came of age, and in all that time, I never felt even the faintest hint of a bond. I convinced myself it simply wasn't meant to happen for me, that perhaps my responsibilities to the pack were meant to be my whole life's focus instead." "And then you walked into a wedding that wasn't yours," Mara said, a small, dry smile tugging at her lips. Rhett laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. "And then, I walked into a wedding that wasn't mine," he agreed. "Life has a strange sense of timing, doesn't it?" They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the river filling the space between them pleasantly, rather than awkwardly. Mara found herself studying him carefully, trying to reconcile the powerful, composed Alpha, who had commanded the attention of an entire hall, with the relaxed, easygoing man walking beside her now. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Of course." "Why didn't you push harder, that first night? Most people, I imagine, would have tried to convince me immediately, tried to explain why the bond meant we belonged together right away." Rhett considered the question seriously before answering. "Because a bond isn't the same as a relationship," he said. "The pull tells us we're meant to be connected, but it doesn't tell us anything about who you are as a person, or who I am to you beyond simply being your mate. I didn't want to rush something that deserved to be built properly, with real understanding between us, not just instinct." Mara felt something warm settle in her chest at his words, a feeling she hadn't expected, but welcomed all the same. "That's a very patient way to look at it. I've had a lot of time to think about what I would want, if I ever found my mate," Rhett admitted. "I always imagined I would want to actually know the person, not just claim a bond and hope everything worked out from there." They reached a small clearing along the riverbank, where flat stones created a natural resting spot, and Rhett gestured toward it, silently asking if she wanted to sit. Mara nodded, and they settled onto the smooth stones together, the sound of flowing water creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "Tell me about you now," Rhett said gently. "I want to know who you are, not just who you're related to or what happened at the ceremony." Mara considered where to begin. "I grew up here, in Ashwood territory. My parents passed when I was young, so Elise and I were mostly raised by our aunt, though she was often busy with pack duties, so we largely looked after each other." "That must have created a close bond between the two of you," Rhett observed. "It did, for most of our lives," Mara said, a note of sadness creeping into her voice. "We were inseparable growing up. It wasn't until recently that things became complicated between us." "Because of Kian," Rhett said, not as a question, but as a gentle acknowledgement. Mara nodded slowly. "I never told her how I felt about him. I convinced myself it would pass, that eventually I would stop caring, but I never did. And then he chose her, and I had to learn how to be happy for my sister, while quietly falling apart inside." Rhett listened without interrupting, his expression patient and understanding, free of judgment. "That sounds incredibly difficult," he said once she finished. "Carrying something like that alone, for so long." "It was," Mara admitted, surprised by how easily the words came now, after years of holding them back. "I think I got very good at pretending everything was fine. Maybe too good." "You don't have to pretend with me," Rhett said softly. "Whatever you feel, whatever you're working through, I'd rather know the truth than watch you perform happiness you don't actually feel." Something in his words struck Mara deeply, a kind of permission she hadn't realized she desperately needed. For years, she had built careful walls around her true feelings, terrified of burdening anyone else with her disappointments. Sitting here now, beside a man who seemed genuinely interested in understanding her, rather than simply claiming her as his bonded mate, she felt those walls beginning to soften, just slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saying that." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing small stories from their lives, laughing over shared observations about pack politics and the strange habits of their respective communities. Mara found herself relaxing more and more as the hours passed, the careful guardedness she had carried into their meeting, gradually giving way to something lighter, easier. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the riverbank, Rhett glanced over at her with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something else, something a bit more difficult?" Mara nodded, bracing herself slightly. "Go ahead. Do you think you'll ever be able to separate your feelings for me from everything that happened with Kian? I don't want to be something you turn to simply because it's easier than facing your heartbreak directly." The question surprised her with its honesty, but she appreciated it all the same. She took a moment to consider her answer carefully, wanting to give him the truth, rather than a reassuring but hollow response. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I want to find out." What I felt for Kian was built on years of quiet hope that never had the chance to become anything real. What I'm feeling with you, even now, feels different. It's not about hoping someone will eventually choose me. It's about actually being seen, right from the start. Rhett's expression softened at her words, something warm and grateful passing behind his eyes. "That means more to me than you probably realize," he said quietly. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun continued its slow descent, neither feeling the need to fill the quiet with unnecessary words. Eventually, Mara rose to her feet, knowing she needed to return before darkness fell completely. "Same time tomorrow?" Rhett asked, standing beside her. Mara considered the question, surprised by how easily her answer came. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." As they walked back toward the pack border together, the easy conversation continuing between them, Mara found herself thinking about how strange life could be. Just days ago, she had been preparing to watch the man she loved bond with someone else, certain her own chance at happiness had already passed her by. Now, walking beside a man she had known for less than a week, she felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Not the desperate hope of unrequited love, but something steadier, calmer, built on honesty, rather than quiet longing. She wasn't ready to call it love yet. It was far too soon for that. But for the first time in years, she felt genuinely curious about her own future, rather than resigned to watching someone else's happiness from the sidelines. When they reached the border where their paths would separate, Rhett turned to face her, his expression sincere. "Thank you for today," he said. for trusting me with even a small piece of your story. Thank you for listening, Mara replied, and for not pushing me to feel more than I'm ready for. Red offered a small, respectful bow of his head before turning to make his way back toward the guest quarters, where he had been staying since the disrupted ceremony. Mara watched him go for a moment before turning back toward her own home, her mind still processing everything they had shared throughout the afternoon. As she walked, she allowed herself to imagine, just briefly, what a future built on this kind of honesty and patience might actually look like. It was a fragile thought, easily disturbed by doubt and old fears, but it was there nonetheless, growing steadily stronger with each passing day. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer simply reacting to the chaos the true mate bond had thrown into her life. For the first time, she was actively choosing to explore what it might mean, on her own terms, at her own pace. And that, she realized, as she reached her front door and looked back one final time toward the darkening forest, felt like the first real step toward reclaiming a future she had once believed was never meant to be hers. While Mara spent her afternoons slowly building something new and unexpected with Rhett, a very different kind of conversation was unfolding inside Kian's private study, where he and Elise sat facing each other across a small wooden table long after the household had gone quiet for the evening. Elise had barely spoken since the interrupted ceremony, and Kian could feel the distance growing between them with each passing day, a silence that felt far heavier than the comfortable quiet they used to share. He set down the papers he had been pretending to review and finally addressed the tension neither of them had been willing to name directly. "You've hardly said a word to me in 3 days," he said quietly. "I know something is bothering you beyond the obvious disruption to our ceremony." Elise looked up at him, her expression carefully guarded, though the exhaustion in her eyes was impossible to hide. "I keep thinking about Mara," she admitted, "about how long she must have carried those feelings, and how completely I missed it." Kian's jaw tightened slightly. "You couldn't have known what she never told you." "Couldn't I have?" Elise pressed. "We were close once, Kian, closer than most sisters. I should have noticed something. I should have asked her directly, instead of assuming everything was fine simply because she smiled through it." Kian remained silent for a long moment, considering his own role in everything that had unfolded. "I never noticed either," he finally admitted, "and I spent far more time around her than you might think, during training sessions, pack meetings, everyday interactions. If there were signs, I missed them completely." Elise studied him carefully, something shifting behind her tired eyes. "Did you ever feel anything for her, before you chose me, I mean?" The question hung heavily in the air between them. Kian took his time answering, wanting to give her the truth rather than a quick, comforting denial. "I valued her friendship greatly," he said slowly. "She was easy to talk to, easy to be around, but what I felt for you was different from the beginning. It was never a question in my mind, who I wanted to choose." "Then why does this feel so complicated now?" Elise asked, her voice tightening with frustration she had clearly been holding back for days. "Because it is complicated," Kian said honestly. "Your sister has been quietly heartbroken because of a choice I made, without ever considering how it might affect her. That's not something either of us can simply ignore, even if my feelings for you haven't changed." Elise wrapped her arms around herself, staring down at the table between them. "I keep wondering if our own bond is somehow less real now, knowing what she went through because of it." Kian reached across the table and gently took her hand, waiting until she looked up at him before speaking. "Our bond is real, Elise. What happened to Mara doesn't diminish what exists between us, but it does mean we owe her honesty and patience while she works through everything on her own terms." Elise nodded slowly, though uncertainty still lingered in her expression. "I want to fix things with her. I don't want this to become something that quietly poisons our relationship for years to come." "Then talk to her," Kian said gently. "Not as the sister who unknowingly caused her pain, but as the sister who genuinely wants to understand and rebuild what might have been damaged." "I have talked to her," Elise said, "but I think there's still more we need to say to each other, more honesty required on both sides." Kian squeezed her hand gently. "Then find the time. I'll support whatever you need, even if that means delaying our own ceremony further while things settle." Elise looked at him gratefully, some of the tension easing from her shoulders for the first time in days. "Thank you for understanding this, instead of just wanting everything to return to normal as quickly as possible." I care about Mara too, Kian said quietly. Not the way she apparently cared for me, but as someone important to this pack, and as your sister. I want to see her happy, genuinely happy, even if that happiness looks different than I might have once assumed. They sat together in thoughtful silence for a while, the tension between them slowly easing into something more manageable, though not yet fully resolved. Outside, the pack territory had settled into its usual nighttime quiet, the distant sound of wind moving through the trees, the only interruption to their stillness. Do you think the true mate bond changes things for Mara, going forward? Elise asked eventually. Do you think she'll actually pursue it with him? Kian considered the question carefully. From what I've observed, Rhett seems genuinely committed to giving her space and time, rather than pressuring her into anything. That patience alone speaks well of his character. You've been watching him, Elise observed, a small note of curiosity in her voice. I've been paying attention, Kian corrected. As Alpha, it's my responsibility to understand anyone who enters our territory with intentions toward one of our pack members, particularly someone connected to my own family through you. Elise offered a small, tired smile. Always the responsible leader. Someone has to be, Kian said, a faint hint of humor returning to his voice for the first time in days. The following morning, Elise sought out Mara before the sun had fully risen, finding her sister sitting quietly on the small porch outside her home, watching the early light spread slowly across the treetops. Elise settled down beside her without a word at first, simply sharing the quiet moment before either of them spoke. I talked with Kian last night, Elise finally said, about everything, about us, about you, about how blind I feel for not noticing what you were carrying all this time. Mara turned to look at her sister, studying the tired but sincere expression on her face. You don't need to feel guilty, Elise. I made my own choices about what to share and what to hide. That responsibility isn't yours to carry. Maybe not entirely, Elise agreed. But I still wish things had been different. I wish I had been the kind of sister you felt safe enough to tell. Mara reached over and took her sister's hand, holding it gently. You are that kind of sister. I was just too afraid to test it. I convinced myself that staying quiet was easier than risking the possibility of disappointing you, or worse, making things awkward between you and Kian. It wouldn't have made things awkward, Elise said softly. It would have given me the chance to actually support you, instead of unknowingly hurting you for years. The sisters sat together, as the sun continued rising slowly over the horizon, the golden light gradually spreading warmth across the quiet porch. But, for the first time in longer than either of them could clearly remember, the conversation between them felt completely honest, free of the careful performances and unspoken tension that had quietly built up over recent years. How are things going with Rhett? Elise asked eventually, genuine curiosity replacing the earlier heaviness in her voice. Mara felt a small, involuntary smile tug at her lips. Good, actually. Better than I expected. He's patient, thoughtful. He doesn't push me toward anything I'm not ready for. That sounds promising, Elise said, squeezing her sister's hand encouragingly. It's still early, Mara cautioned. But for the first time, I feel like I'm allowed to actually explore what I want, rather than just accepting whatever happens to me. Elise nodded, understanding completely. I'm happy for you, Mara. Genuinely happy, even with everything that's happened. Thank you, Mara said quietly. That means more than you probably realize. As the sisters continued talking, slowly rebuilding the closeness that had quietly frayed over recent years, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the edge of the nearby tree line, a stranger whose presence in Ashwood territory had gone completely unnoticed until this very moment. The figure remained still, observing carefully, before disappearing silently back into the deeper forest, leaving no trace behind, except a faint, unfamiliar scent that would soon become impossible to ignore. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Mara and Rhett met regularly along the riverbank, their conversations growing easier and more open with each visit. She found herself looking forward to their time together, with an eagerness she hadn't felt in years, the careful walls she had built around her heart, slowly coming down brick by brick. But not everyone within Ashwood territory viewed the situation with the same openness. Whispers still followed Mara through the community, some curious, some quietly disapproving. A few older pack members muttered about tradition being disrupted, about the strangeness of a neighboring alpha claiming a bond with someone from another pack entirely. Mara did her best to ignore the muttering, though it wore on her more than she liked to admit. It was on one such afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after the disrupted ceremony, that the quiet rhythm of her new routine was interrupted entirely. She had arrived at their usual meeting spot along the river earlier than expected, eager to escape the heaviness of the pack's lingering gossip. Rhett had not yet arrived, so she settled onto the familiar flat stones, watching the water rush steadily past while she waited. She noticed the unfamiliar scent before she heard anything, a sharp, foreign smell carried faintly on the breeze, unlike anything belonging to Ashwood or Blackridge territory. Her instincts, sharpened by years of pack training, immediately went on alert. She rose slowly from the stones, scanning the tree line carefully. A man stepped out from between the trees a moment later, tall and lean, with sharp, calculating eyes that swept over her with unsettling precision. He wore dark traveling clothes, unmarked by any pack insignia she recognized, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being questioned. "You must be Mara," the stranger said, his voice smooth, but carrying an edge she immediately distrusted. "Rhett's newly discovered mate. I've heard quite a bit about you these past 2 weeks." Mara kept her posture steady, refusing to let her uncertainty show. "I don't believe we've met." "Who are you, and what business do you have on Ashwood territory?" The stranger offered a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Callan. I once held a position of some importance within Blackridge, before Rhett decided my methods no longer suited his vision for the pack." Mara felt a chill settle over her despite the warm afternoon air. "That doesn't explain why you're here." "Doesn't it?" Callan said, taking a slow step closer, though he stopped a careful distance away. "I've spent the past several years watching Rhett build his little kingdom, watching him gain the loyalty of pack members who once respected my judgment far more than his. When I heard he had finally found his true mate, I confess I grew curious about the woman capable of capturing his attention so completely." "Whatever grievance you have with Rhett has nothing to do with me," Mara said firmly, though her heart pounded steadily faster. Callan tilted his head slightly, studying her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Perhaps not directly, but a mate bond creates certain vulnerabilities, doesn't it? Weaknesses that a clever person might find useful, should the situation call for it." Before Mara could respond, a low, warning growl echoed from the tree line behind her, and she turned to see Rhett emerging rapidly from the forest, his expression darkening the moment his eyes landed on Callan. "Step away from her," Rhett said, his voice carrying an authority Mara hadn't heard from him before, sharp and commanding, in a way that left no room for argument. Callan raised his hands slowly, though his expression remained infuriatingly calm. "Relax, old friend. I was simply introducing myself to your mate, no harm intended. You lost the right to call yourself my friend the day I discovered what you were doing behind my back," Rhett said, moving quickly to position himself between Mara and Callan, his shoulders tense with barely restrained anger. "Leave this territory immediately, or I will ensure you regret staying." Callan's smile widened slightly, though it held no real warmth. "Such hostility. I suppose I should expect nothing less, given how our last conversation ended." "Now, Callan," Rhett said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. For a long moment, the two men stared each other down, tension crackling in the air between them like a gathering storm. Then, finally, Callan took a slow step backward, offering a mocking half-bow. "Very well. I'll take my leave for now. But do give some thought to what I said, Mara. Bonds create vulnerabilities. It might serve you both well to remember that." With that, he turned and disappeared back into the tree line, moving with an unsettling silence that left Mara feeling deeply unsettled long after he had vanished from sight. Rhett turned to her immediately, his expression shifting from anger to concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," Mara said, though her voice trembled slightly. "He didn't touch me. But Rhett, what was that about? Who is he really?" Rhett let out a heavy breath, running a hand through his hair, as some of the tension slowly drained from his shoulders. "Callan used to serve as my second in command, years ago. He believed the pack should expand its territory through more aggressive means, forcing smaller packs into submission, rather than building alliances through diplomacy. When I refused to follow that path, he began working against me quietly, trying to undermine my leadership from within. What happened? Mara asked. I discovered his plans before they could fully take root, and I removed him from his position, exiled him from Blackridge territory entirely, Rhett explained. I hadn't heard from him in nearly 3 years, not since the day he left. I never expected him to resurface, especially not here. Mara felt a fresh wave of unease settle over her. He mentioned vulnerabilities. Do you think he means to use our bond against you somehow? Rhett's expression grew serious, thoughtful. I don't know exactly what he's planning, but I intend to find out before he has the chance to act on whatever scheme he's concocting. In the meantime, I want you to be careful, Mara. Please don't wander far from the pack territory alone, until we understand what we're dealing with. Mara nodded, though the fear settling in her chest refused to fully dissipate. Do you think he's dangerous? I think he's ambitious, and ambitious people who feel wronged can be unpredictable, Rhett said carefully. I won't pretend the threat isn't real, but I also won't let anything happen to you. I promise you that. Despite the fear still lingering in her chest, Mara found herself steadied by the fierce determination in his voice, the protective certainty that radiated from him, even in the aftermath of such an unsettling encounter. She realized, standing there beside him in the fading afternoon light, just how quickly her feelings for him had grown, evolving from cautious curiosity into something far deeper and more meaningful than she had expected so soon. Thank you, she said softly, for getting here when you did. I felt something was wrong, Rhett admitted. Through the bond, I think. A strange unease that pulled me toward you, before I even understood why. Mara considered this, remembering the strength of the connection she had felt the very first night, the undeniable pull that had brought them together, despite every obstacle standing between them. Perhaps the bond offered more than simple recognition. Perhaps it offered protection as well, an invisible thread connecting them across distance and uncertainty. We should tell Ophelia about this, Mara said. The council should know Callan is nearby, especially if he intends to cause trouble. Rhett nodded in agreement. You're right. Let's go now, before he has the chance to disappear entirely. Together, they made their way back toward the pack meeting hall, Rhett's hand resting lightly but protectively at the small of her back as they walked. Despite the unsettling encounter they had just experienced, Mara found a strange comfort in his presence beside her, a steady reassurance that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not have to face them alone. The afternoon sun continued its slow descent behind them, casting long shadows across the forest path, and somewhere in the distance, hidden among the trees, Callan watched their retreating figures with a calculating expression, already turning over the pieces of a plan he had been carefully assembling for longer than either of them realized. Ophelia listened carefully, as Rhett and Mara explained everything that had happened along the riverbank, her expression growing increasingly troubled as the details unfolded. She sat quietly for a long moment after they finished, considering the implications of Callan's unexpected return. This is concerning news, she finally said. A man exiled for plotting against his own alpha, now lurking near our territory, with veiled threats aimed at a bonded pair. We cannot take this lightly. I agree completely, Rhett said. I intend to strengthen patrols along the border immediately, and I would ask that Ashwood do the same, at least until we understand what Callan is truly planning. Ophelia nodded slowly. I will speak with our senior guards this evening. In the meantime, Mara, I want you to avoid traveling beyond pack borders without an escort. Whatever grievance this man holds against Rhett, it seems clear he views you as a way to strike at him indirectly. Mara felt a fresh wave of unease at the thought, though she nodded in agreement. I understand. I'll be careful. The meeting continued for a while longer, discussing practical measures to increase security throughout the territory. By the time it concluded, evening had settled fully over the packlands, and Mara found herself unusually reluctant to return home alone, despite having done so countless times before without a second thought. Rhett seemed to sense her hesitation, offering to walk her back personally, an offer she accepted gratefully. They walked together through the quiet, darkening forest, the earlier tension slowly easing into a more comfortable silence as they moved further from the meeting hall. I'm sorry this happened, Rhett said eventually, breaking the quiet between them. You deserved a chance to explore this bond, without the added complication of my past mistakes following us here. You didn't make a mistake by removing someone dangerous from a position of power, Mara said firmly. Callan made his own choices, You're not responsible for the fact that he refuses to accept the consequences of those choices. Rhett offered a small, grateful smile, though worry still lingered behind his eyes. I appreciate you saying that. Still, I intend to handle this quickly and decisively. I won't let him threaten your safety, or the safety of anyone connected to either of our packs. They reached Mara's small home a short while later, the familiar porch light casting a warm glow across the quiet yard. Mara paused at the door, turning to face him fully. Will you be all right tonight? She asked, concern coloring her voice. If Callan intends to cause trouble, he might target you directly. I'll be fine, Rhett assured her. I've faced worse threats than a bitter former officer with wounded pride. But thank you for worrying. Despite the reassurance, Mara found herself reluctant to simply let him walk away into the darkness alone. Would you like to stay for a while? Just until we're both certain everything is calm. Rhett studied her carefully, clearly recognizing the offer for what it was. Not simply practical caution, but a genuine desire for his continued company. I would like that very much. They spent the remainder of the evening together inside her small home, sharing a simple meal and quiet conversation that gradually helped ease the lingering tension from earlier in the day. As the night deepened around them, Mara found herself studying Rhett's features in the soft candlelight, appreciating the steady calm he brought to even the most unsettling situations. Can I ask you something? She said eventually, breaking a comfortable lull in their conversation. Anything, Rhett replied. Do you regret coming here? To Ashwood, I mean. If you hadn't attended that diplomatic visit, none of this would have happened. No disrupted ceremony, no threat from Callan following you into new territory. Rhett considered the question seriously before answering. No, he said firmly. I don't regret it at all. Whatever complications have followed, finding you was worth every bit of difficulty we've faced, and whatever difficulty still lies ahead. Mara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, genuine and unguarded. I feel the same way, she admitted quietly. Even with everything that's happened, I can't imagine wishing any of this away. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the candlelight flickering gently between them, before Rhett finally rose to leave, promising to check in with the increased border patrols before returning to his guest quarters for the night. Lock your door, he said gently as he prepared to leave. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, reach out through the bond. I'll feel it, and I'll come immediately. I will, Mara promised. He lingered for a moment longer at the doorway, studying her face with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster. Good night, Mara. Good night, Rhett. As he disappeared into the darkness beyond her porch, Mara closed the door carefully behind her, locking it as he had instructed, before making her way toward her bedroom, her mind still turning over everything that had happened throughout the long, eventful day. Despite the lingering worry about Callan's intentions, she found herself falling asleep more easily than expected, comforted by the knowledge that whatever threats lay ahead, she no longer faced them entirely alone. She woke sometime deep in the night to the distant sound of raised voices near the pack's northern border, faint but unmistakable through her open window. Her heart immediately began racing as she rose quickly from bed, pulling on a warm cloak before hurrying outside to investigate. The night air felt sharp and cold against her skin as she moved swiftly through the quiet pack grounds, following the sound of commotion toward the border patrol stations. As she drew closer, she could make out several figures moving urgently in the darkness, their voices tense and alarmed. She spotted Rhett among them almost immediately, his posture rigid with barely controlled anger, as he addressed one of the border guards. Mara hurried closer, her breath catching as she took in the scene before her. One of the guard posts had been damaged, wooden beams splintered and scattered across the ground, and a faint, familiar scent hung heavy in the air, one she immediately recognized from her earlier encounter along the riverbank. He was here, Rhett said grimly, as Mara approached, his expression dark with restrained fury. Callan crossed onto Ashwood territory tonight, testing our defenses. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, but this confirms what we feared. He intends to cause real trouble. Mara felt her stomach twist with fear, though she forced herself to remain steady. What do we do now? Rhett turned to face her fully, his expression softening slightly despite the tension of the moment. We increase security immediately, and we make it clear that further aggression will not be tolerated. I won't let him threaten this pack, or you. without facing serious consequences. As the guards began organizing additional patrols throughout the remainder of the night, Rhett pulled Mara gently aside, away from the immediate commotion, his hands settling protectively on her shoulders. "I need you to stay close to the main pack grounds until we resolve this," he said seriously. "No more solitary walks along the river, not until Callan has been dealt with properly." Mara nodded, understanding the necessity, despite the disappointment of losing their quiet meeting spot, at least temporarily. "I understand. Just, please be careful yourself. Whatever grudge he holds, it seems focused primarily on you." "I will be," Rhett promised, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek in a tender gesture that helped ease some of her lingering fear. "I have far too much to protect now to take any unnecessary risks." As the night wore on, the pack settled into an uneasy vigilance, guards patrolling diligently along every border, while Ophelia and Rhett worked together to develop a more comprehensive strategy for dealing with Callan's escalating aggression. Mara remained close to the main grounds as instructed, her mind racing with worry, despite Rhett's reassurances. Whatever peace and gentle discovery she had found over the past 2 weeks now felt threatened by a danger neither she nor Rhett had anticipated when their unexpected bond first revealed itself. Yet even amid the growing uncertainty, she found herself more determined than ever to see this through, to protect what she had only just begun to build, rather than allowing fear to drive her back into the careful, guarded existence she had maintained for far too long. Whatever Callan intended, she resolved silently, as she finally returned to her bed in the early hours of the morning. She would not let it destroy the fragile, precious connection that had somehow found its way into her life when she least expected it. The days following the border incident passed in a tense blur of increased patrols and careful vigilance. Mara found herself confined largely to the main pack grounds, a restriction that chafed against her independent nature, though she understood the necessity given the circumstances. She spent much of her time with Elise, the two sisters using the enforced closeness to continue rebuilding the bond that had quietly frayed over the past several years. "I keep thinking about what Callan said," Mara admitted one afternoon, as she and Elise sat together in the small garden behind their childhood home, shelling a basket of fresh peas between them. "About bonds creating vulnerabilities. I can't stop wondering if he's right, if my connection to Rhett has somehow made things more dangerous rather than better." Elise considered this thoughtfully before responding. "I don't think that's quite the right way to look at it. Every connection carries some risk, doesn't it? Loving someone always means giving them the power to hurt you, whether through their own actions or through the actions of others who wish them harm. That's not a flaw in the bond itself. It's simply the nature of caring deeply about another person." Mara turned this over in her mind, recognizing the wisdom in her sister's words. "When did you get so thoughtful about all of this?" Elise laughed softly, a genuine, warm sound that had become more frequent between them in recent days. "I've had a lot of time to think, especially since my own ceremony was so dramatically interrupted. Watching everything unfold with you and Rhett has taught me quite a bit about what real connection actually requires." "And what does it require?" Mara asked, curious. "Courage, mostly," Elise said. "The willingness to remain vulnerable, even when circumstances make vulnerability feel dangerous. I think that's something you're learning to do now, more than I ever really had to, given how smoothly things unfolded between Kian and me, before all of this happened." Mara considered her sister's words carefully, recognizing the truth in them. Despite the fear Callan's threats had introduced into her life, she found herself unwilling to retreat back into the careful emotional distance she had maintained for so many years before Rhett's arrival. Whatever risks the bond carried, the alternative, returning to a life of quiet, unspoken longing, felt far less appealing now that she understood what genuine connection could actually feel like. Their peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching, and both sisters looked up to see one of the younger pack guards rushing toward them, his expression urgent. "Ophelia requests your presence immediately," he said, slightly out of breath. "Both of you, Rhett and Kian, are already gathering at the meeting hall." Mara felt her stomach drop with sudden apprehension. "What's happened?" "Another border incident," the guard explained quickly. "But this time, we managed to capture someone. One of Callan's associates, it seems, caught attempting to breach the eastern perimeter." Mara and Elise exchanged a quick, worried glance, before rising immediately and following the guard back toward the meeting hall, their earlier peaceful conversation forgotten in the sudden rush of urgency. They arrived to find the hall already filled with tense activity, Ophelia standing near the front of the room in quiet conversation with Rhett and Kian, while several guards stood watch near a restrained figure seated in the center of the room. The captured man looked young, perhaps not much older than Mara herself, his expression a mixture of defiance and poorly concealed fear. "What have we learned?" Mara asked as she approached, addressing Ophelia directly. Ophelia's expression remained grim. "This young man has confirmed working under Callan's direction. According to his account, Callan has been gathering a small group of loyal followers over the past several months, individuals disillusioned with their own pack leadership, promising them positions of power once he reclaims what he believes was unjustly taken from him." "Reclaims from Blackridge?" Red asked sharply, stepping forward. The captured man nodded reluctantly. "He speaks of returning to challenge your leadership directly, of proving that his methods would have made the pack stronger than your diplomatic approach ever could. But recently, his focus has shifted somewhat." "Toward what?" Mara asked, though dread already coiled tightly in her stomach. The young man hesitated, glancing nervously toward Ophelia before continuing. "Toward using the mate bond as leverage. He believes that capturing you, even briefly, would force Red into a position where he'd have no choice but to negotiate, potentially even step down from his leadership entirely, to secure your safe return." A heavy silence fell over the hall, as the implications of this plan settled over everyone present. Mara felt her pulse quicken with fear, though she forced herself to remain outwardly calm, aware of everyone watching her reaction. Rhett's expression had darkened considerably, his hands clenching into tight fists at his sides.
"He actually believes I would sacrifice pack leadership for a ransom exchange?"
"He seems quite convinced of it," the captured man admitted. "He speaks of it, as though it's simply a matter of time before the opportunity presents itself." Ophelia turned to address the room fully, her voice steady and commanding, despite the tension evident on her face. "This changes our approach considerably. We can no longer treat Callan as simply a nuisance testing our borders. He represents a genuine threat, one requiring immediate and decisive action." "I agree completely," Rhett said, his voice hard with determination. "I won't allow him the opportunity to act on this plan. We need to locate his base of operations and neutralize the threat before he can attempt anything against Mara." Kian stepped forward as well, his expression equally serious. "Ashwood will assist fully in this effort. Whatever resources you need, guards, trackers, information about the surrounding territory, they're available to you." Rhett nodded gratefully toward him. "Thank you. This threat affects both our packs now, given Callan's clear intention to exploit the connection between Mara and myself." The meeting continued for a while longer, strategizing carefully about how best to locate and address Callan's small band of followers before they could act on their dangerous plan. Mara listened intently, though fear continued to churn steadily in her stomach, at the realization of just how seriously her safety was now being treated. As the meeting finally concluded and pack members began dispersing to begin their assigned tasks, Red approached Mara directly, his expression softening slightly despite the seriousness of the situation. "I won't let anything happen to you," he said firmly, taking her hands gently in his. "I promise you that, completely." "I believe you," Mara said, though her voice trembled slightly. "But please, be careful yourself. If Callan is truly this determined, I worry about what lengths he might go to." "I've faced difficult situations before," Red assured her, "and now I have an entire pack alliance standing behind me. Rather than facing this alone, we will handle this together." Mara found comfort in his words, though the underlying fear remained present in her chest, as she considered everything that lay ahead. Whatever peaceful, careful courtship she had imagined sharing with Rhett had now become entangled with genuine danger, a threat that could not simply be wished away or ignored. Yet even amid this fear, she found herself more determined than ever to stand beside him through whatever challenges awaited, rather than retreating into the safety of distance and separation. The bond that had once felt like an overwhelming, unexpected disruption to her carefully ordered life now felt like something worth protecting fiercely, regardless of the risks involved. As evening settled over the pack grounds and additional patrols began their vigilant watch along every border, Mara found herself standing beside Rhett near the edge of the meeting hall, watching the sun disappear behind the distant hills. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm glad you walked through those doors that night, even with everything that's followed." Rhett turned to look at her, his expression filled with quiet affection despite the tension of the day. "So am I," he said softly. "More than you probably realize." They stood together in comfortable silence as darkness gradually settled over the territory, both of them acutely aware that the coming days would likely test the strength of their newly formed bond in ways neither of them could fully predict. But for the first time since Callan's threats had first emerged, Mara felt a renewed sense of determination settle over her, a quiet resolve to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with courage rather than fear. 3 days after the captured follower revealed Callan's plan, the combined tracking teams from Ashwood and Blackridge finally located a small camp hidden deep within a rocky ravine, several miles beyond the northern border, well outside the boundaries of either pack's official territory. Rhett had insisted on joining the tracking party personally, despite Ophelia's initial concerns about the Alpha's own safety, arguing that his knowledge of Callan's habits and tendencies made his presence essential to the operation. Mara had wanted desperately to join as well, but both Rhett and Ophelia had firmly insisted she remain behind at the main pack grounds, protected by a small group of trusted guards while the operation unfolded. The wait proved excruciating, each passing hour stretching endlessly as she paced restlessly through her small home, unable to focus on anything beyond worry for Rhett's safety. Elise stayed close throughout the long day, offering quiet companionship as the hours dragged on, without word from the tracking party. "They'll be all right," she said gently, though Mara could hear the uncertainty beneath her sister's reassuring tone. "Rhett strikes me as someone who plans carefully before taking action. He won't rush into unnecessary danger." "I know," Mara said, though the words did little to ease the tight knot of anxiety in her chest. "I just wish I could be there, doing something useful, instead of sitting here waiting." "Waiting takes its own kind of strength," Elise said softly. "Trust me, I understand how difficult it is." As evening approached and still no word arrived from the tracking party, Mara found herself standing near her window, staring out into the darkening forest, her mind replaying every possible outcome of the confrontation currently unfolding somewhere beyond her sight. She tried reaching out through the bond, as Rhett had once instructed her to do if anything felt wrong, though she wasn't entirely certain how to properly sense his condition from such a distance. Closing her eyes, she focused inward, searching for the familiar warmth of the connection she had felt so strongly since that first night in the ceremony hall. For a long moment, she felt nothing beyond her own anxious heartbeat, but then, faintly, she sensed something, a flicker of tension, followed by a wave of fierce determination that clearly belonged to Rhett rather than herself. He was alive. He was fighting, but he was alive. The realization offered some small comfort, though the uncertainty of the situation continued weighing heavily on her throughout the remainder of the evening. It wasn't until well past midnight that the sound of returning footsteps finally reached the main pack grounds, and Mara rushed outside immediately, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. She spotted Rhett almost immediately among the returning group, and relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. He looked exhausted, a fresh bruise forming along his jaw, and several small cuts visible across his hands, but he was standing, walking under his own power, very much alive. "Rhett," she called out, hurrying toward him without any concern for who might be watching. He turned at the sound of her voice, and despite his obvious exhaustion, his expression softened immediately upon seeing her. He met her halfway, pulling her carefully into his arms as she reached him, holding her close, despite the fresh injuries marking his body. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice rough with fatigue. "Callan has been captured. His followers scattered once they realized they were outnumbered and outmatched." "Are you badly hurt?" Mara asked, pulling back slightly to examine the visible injuries more closely, her hands gently tracing the edges of the bruise along his jaw. "Nothing serious," Rhett assured her. "A few bruises, some minor cuts. Nothing that won't heal within a few days." Relief washed through her so completely that tears sprang unexpectedly to her eyes. "I was so worried," she admitted. "I could feel something through the bond, but I didn't know if you were safe or not." Rhett reached up, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I felt you too. throughout the entire confrontation. Your worry, your fear. It actually helped, in a strange way. It reminded me exactly what I was fighting to protect. They stood together for a long moment, simply holding each other amid the returning commotion of tired guards and relieved pack members, celebrating the successful resolution of the threat that had hung over them for the past several days. Kian appeared shortly after, equally exhausted but similarly unharmed, immediately seeking out Elise, who rushed to embrace him with visible relief. Ophelia addressed the gathered crowd briefly, confirming that Callan and his small group of followers had been successfully captured and would face appropriate consequences under pack law, ensuring they would no longer pose a threat to either territory. The announcement brought a collective sigh of relief throughout the assembled crowd, tension finally beginning to ease after days of anxious uncertainty. As the celebration began to wind down and pack members slowly dispersed to their respective homes, Mara insisted on personally tending to Rhett's injuries, guiding him gently toward her own home, despite his protests that he was perfectly capable of managing on his own. "Let me do this," she said firmly, settling him onto a chair in her small kitchen before retrieving supplies to clean and bandage his wounds properly. "You spent an entire day protecting everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once." Rhett offered a tired but genuine smile as she carefully cleaned the cuts along his hands, her touch gentle despite the seriousness of the task. "I could get used to this kind of care," he said softly. "Don't get too comfortable," Mara replied, though warmth colored her voice despite the teasing tone. "I expect you to return the favor eventually." "I fully intend to," Rhett assured her, watching her work with an expression of quiet affection that made her heart flutter, despite the exhaustion of the long, anxious day. As she finished bandaging the last of his minor injuries, Mara found herself studying his face carefully, taking in the relief evident in his features now that the immediate danger had finally passed. "What happens to Callan now?" she asked. "He'll face judgment under both our pack laws, given the threats extended toward Ashwood territory, as well as his original crimes against Blackridge," Rhett explained. "Exile beyond both territories permanently, most likely, with clear consequences should he ever attempt to return." Mara nodded, relieved that the threat had been resolved without more serious harm coming to anyone involved. "I'm glad this is finally over." "So am I," Rhett agreed, reaching out to gently take her hand. "Though I confess, even amid all the danger and uncertainty, I found myself thinking constantly about you throughout the entire ordeal, about how much I wanted to return safely, specifically so I could continue building whatever this is between us." Mara felt her cheeks warm at his words, though she didn't look away from his steady gaze. "I thought about that too, throughout the entire day, how much I wanted the chance to keep getting to know you, without the constant shadow of danger hanging over everything." "Then perhaps now we finally have that chance," Rhett said softly, his thumb tracing gentle circles across the back of her hand. They sat together quietly for a while longer, the exhaustion of the day finally beginning to catch up with both of them, though neither seemed eager to end their time together despite the late hour. Eventually, Mara insisted Rhett rest properly, walking him carefully to the door, despite his continued protests that he felt perfectly fine. "Thank you," he said quietly as he prepared to leave, "for everything today, for worrying about me, for tending to my injuries, for being exactly the kind of person worth fighting for." Mara felt her heart swell with emotion at his words, the careful walls she had maintained for so many years now feeling almost entirely dismantled in his presence. "We can talk more tomorrow, once you've had proper time to recover." Rhett leaned down slowly, giving her ample opportunity to step away if she wished, before pressing a gentle, lingering kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Mara." "Good night, Rhett," she whispered, watching him disappear slowly into the quiet darkness beyond her porch, her heart lighter than it had felt in longer than she could remember. As she finally settled into bed later that night, the danger of recent days now safely behind them, Mara allowed herself to fully embrace the warmth and hope that had been steadily growing within her heart since that first unexpected night in the ceremony hall. Whatever challenges still lay ahead in building a life alongside Rhett, she felt more confident than ever that she was exactly where she was meant to be. With the threat of Callan finally resolved, life within Ashwood territory gradually settled back into a calmer, steadier rhythm over the following weeks. Mara found herself able to fully embrace her growing relationship with Rhett, without the constant shadow of danger looming over every quiet moment they shared together. Their walks along the riverbank resumed, though now accompanied by an easy familiarity that hadn't existed during those first careful, tentative conversations. Mara found herself laughing more freely, speaking more openly, allowing herself to fully experience the joy of a connection built on genuine understanding, rather than desperate hope or quiet longing. One afternoon, nearly a month after the confrontation with Callan, Rhett requested a formal meeting with Ophelia and the Pack Council, along with Mara's presence, to discuss the next steps in properly honoring their bond according to traditional customs. Mara felt her heart race with a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she took her seat within the familiar meeting hall, watching Rhett stand confidently before the assembled council members. He looked composed, dressed formally for the occasion, though she could sense a hint of nervousness beneath his steady exterior, a vulnerability that made her love him all the more. "I would like to formally request permission to court Mara, according to proper Pack customs," Rhett announced, addressing Ophelia and the assembled council members directly. "Not simply as a formality following our initial bond recognition, but as a genuine commitment to building a life together, should she continue to wish it." Ophelia turned toward Mara, her expression warm despite the formal setting. "Mara, do you consent to this courtship, understanding fully what such a commitment entails?" Mara rose from her seat, her heart pounding steadily as she met Rhett's hopeful gaze across the quiet hall. "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying easily through the attentive silence. "I have never felt more certain of anything in my life." A warm murmur of approval swept through the gathered council members, and Ophelia nodded with evident satisfaction. "Then, let it be recorded, Rhett of Blackridge and Mara of Ashwood shall proceed with a formal courtship, honoring the true mate bond discovered between them, with the full support and blessing of both packs." The formal proceedings continued for a while longer, addressing practical considerations about how their respective pack duties might be balanced moving forward, given their leadership positions within separate territories. Mara listened intently, though her attention kept drifting toward Rhett, unable to fully contain the joy building steadily within her chest at the formal recognition of what had grown between them. Following the council meeting, Elise approached her sister with visible excitement, pulling her into a tight embrace the moment they stepped outside the meeting hall. "I'm so happy for you," she said warmly. "You deserve this, Mara. Every bit of it." "Thank you," Mara said, returning her sister's embrace with equal warmth. "I couldn't have gotten through everything these past few months without your support." "That's what sisters are for," Elise said, smiling brightly. "Now, tell me everything. What happens next in a proper courtship?" Mara laughed softly, some of her earlier nervousness giving way to genuine excitement. "I'm honestly not entirely certain, but I think that's part of what makes this exciting. We get to figure it out together, at our own pace." Over the following weeks, Mara and Rhett's courtship blossomed steadily, marked by thoughtful gestures and deepening intimacy that felt entirely different from the desperate hope she had once quietly harbored for someone else's attention. Rhett made a point of dividing his time carefully between his responsibilities leading Blackridge and his growing commitment to their relationship, often traveling between territories to ensure their connection continued strengthening despite the physical distance separating their respective packs. During one particularly memorable evening, Rhett arranged a quiet dinner beneath the stars, choosing a secluded clearing not far from where they had first properly spoken following the disrupted ceremony. Soft lanterns hung from nearby branches, casting a warm, gentle glow across the small gathering he had carefully prepared. "This is beautiful," Mara said, taking in the thoughtful arrangement with genuine appreciation. "You didn't need to go to such trouble." "I wanted to," Rhett said simply, guiding her toward the small blanket spread out beneath the twinkling lanterns. "You deserve thoughtful gestures, Mara, especially after everything you've endured these past months." They settled comfortably onto the blanket together, sharing a simple but carefully prepared meal, while conversation flowed easily between them, touching on everything from pack politics to childhood memories, each sharing pieces of themselves with growing openness and trust. As the evening deepened and the stars overhead grew increasingly vivid against the darkening sky, Rhett grew quiet for a moment, studying Mara's face with an expression of deep affection that made her heart flutter with anticipation. "I've been thinking a lot about our future together," he said softly. "About what it might look like, practically speaking. once our courtship period concludes. What have you been thinking? Mara asked, genuinely curious. I know traditionally, a mate typically relocates to join their partner's pack. Rhett began carefully. But I don't want to simply assume that arrangement without discussing it properly with you first. Your connection to Ashwood, to your sister, to the community you've grown up within, matters deeply, and I don't want you to feel forced into leaving everything familiar behind. Mara felt warmth spread through her chest at his consideration. What are you suggesting instead? Perhaps we could find a way to divide our time between both territories, Rhett proposed, strengthening the alliance between Ashwood and Blackridge in the process, while ensuring you never feel completely disconnected from your own home and family. Mara considered this thoughtfully, appreciating the careful consideration he had clearly put into finding a solution that honored both of their needs. I think that could work beautifully, she said, and it would set a meaningful example for both packs, demonstrating how alliance and cooperation can strengthen everyone involved, rather than requiring one side to simply sacrifice everything familiar. Rhett smiled warmly, clearly pleased by her enthusiasm for the idea. I was hoping you would see it that way. They continued discussing practical details late into the evening, envisioning together what their shared future might realistically look like, each conversation deepening their connection and mutual understanding. As the night grew late and the lanterns began flickering lower, Rhett reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, carefully carved wooden pendant. Simple, but beautifully crafted. I made this myself, he said, offering it to her with visible nervousness. It's traditional, among Blackridge customs, to offer a handmade token during courtship, symbolizing dedication and effort invested in building the relationship properly. Mara accepted the pendant carefully, turning it over in her hands to examine the intricate detail carved into the simple wood, two interlocking shapes representing unity and connection. It's beautiful, Rhett. Thank you. I wanted you to have something tangible, he explained, a reminder of my commitment to you, even during moments when I might be traveling between territories, attending to my responsibilities as alpha. Mara carefully fastened the pendant around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle comfortably against her skin, a physical symbol of the growing bond between them. I'll treasure this, she said softly, reaching up to gently touch his face. Just as I treasure everything we've built together these past months. Rhett leaned forward slowly, and this time, Mara closed the remaining distance between them herself, meeting his lips in a gentle, tender kiss beneath the star-filled sky. It felt entirely different from anything she had once imagined sharing with someone else, years earlier, during her quiet, unspoken longing. This connection felt real, chosen deliberately by both parties, built on genuine understanding and mutual respect rather than desperate hope. When they finally parted, Mara rested her forehead gently against his, both of them smiling softly in the warm lantern light. I'm so glad you walked through those doors that night, she whispered. So am I, Rhett murmured in response, more than words could ever properly express. They remained together beneath the stars for a while longer, savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment, each fully aware that whatever challenges might still arise in building a shared future between two distinct pack territories, they would face them together, with a foundation of genuine love and mutual respect steadily strengthening between them with each passing day. 6 months after that first fateful ceremony, the Great Hall of Ashwood stood once again filled with lanterns and flowers, gathered pack members from both Ashwood and Blackridge territories, filling every available seat and standing space along the walls. This time, however, the atmosphere carried none of the tension or heartbreak that had marked the earlier disrupted celebration. Instead, genuine joy and anticipation filled the air, as everyone waited eagerly for the ceremony about to unfold. Mara stood in a small preparation room, adjacent to the main hall, studying her reflection carefully in a tall mirror. Her dress, a deep warm gold that complemented her features beautifully, flowed elegantly around her, chosen carefully over the past several weeks, with input from both Elise and several close friends, who had rallied enthusiastically around her upcoming bonding ceremony. You look beautiful, Elise said softly, adjusting a small flower, woven carefully into Mara's hair. Absolutely radiant. I feel radiant, Mara admitted, smiling brightly at her sister's reflection in the mirror. I never imagined feeling this happy, this certain about anything. Elise's eyes glistened slightly with emotion, as she studied her sister carefully. "I'm so proud of you, Mara, for everything you've overcome, for the courage you found to embrace something completely unexpected, even after everything that happened. I couldn't have done it without your support," Mara said, turning to embrace her sister warmly. "Truly, Elise. Having you beside me through all of this has meant everything." The sisters embraced for a long moment, the closeness between them now fully restored, stronger perhaps than it had ever been before, forged through honest conversation and genuine understanding, rather than simply assumed closeness built on unspoken feelings. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Ophelia stepped inside, her expression warm as she took in the sight of Mara, fully prepared for the ceremony ahead. "It's time," she said gently. "Red is waiting, along with everyone gathered to witness this joyful occasion." Mara felt her heart race with excited anticipation as she took one final steadying breath, gathering her composure, before following Ophelia and Elise toward the main hall. As the large wooden doors opened before her, revealing the beautifully decorated hall beyond, she felt none of the anxious dread that had once accompanied her presence at a similar ceremony months earlier. Instead, pure joy and certainty filled her chest as she began walking slowly down the flower-lined aisle. She spotted Red immediately at the front of the hall, dressed handsomely in deep blue formal attire, his expression filled with such open adoration that Mara felt tears prick at her eyes, despite her best efforts to maintain composure. As she continued down the aisle, guests reached out gently to offer blessings and warm smiles, the entire hall radiating genuine happiness for the couple about to formalize their bond. Keon stood near the front as well, positioned respectfully among the honored guests, his expression sincere and supportive as he watched Mara approach. He had grown to genuinely respect Red over the past several months, their initial tension gradually giving way to mutual understanding as both packs worked increasingly closely together, strengthened by the alliance their bond represented. As Mara finally reached the front of the hall, Red stepped forward to take her hands gently in his eyes shining with emotion as he studied her face carefully. "You look absolutely stunning," he whispered softly, just for her to hear. "You're not so bad yourself," Mara replied with a playful smile, easing some of the formal tension of the moment. Ophelia stepped forward to begin the ceremony, her voice carrying warmly through the attentive hall. "We gather today to witness and celebrate a bond built on genuine understanding, patience, and mutual respect. Red and Mara have shown us all what it means to honor a true mate connection properly, taking the time necessary to build something real and lasting, rather than rushing simply because tradition or instinct demanded it." She continued speaking about the significance of their journey, touching briefly on the challenges they had faced together, the threat they had overcome, and the strength they had discovered within their partnership throughout months of careful courtship. Mara listened, her hands held securely within Rhett's, feeling the weight of everything they had built together settling warmly over her heart. "Red of Blackridge," Ophelia said, turning toward him formally. "Do you accept Mara as your true and bonded mate, promising to honor, protect, and cherish her throughout all the years ahead?" "I do," Rhett said clearly, his voice steady with genuine conviction. "Without hesitation, without doubt, she is everything I never knew I was searching for, and I promise to spend every day proving myself worthy of her choice." Ophelia turned toward Mara next, her expression warm with genuine happiness. "Mara of Ashwood, do you accept Red as your true and bonded mate, promising to honor, protect, and cherish him throughout all the years ahead?" Mara felt tears finally spill freely down her cheeks as she looked into Rhett's eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion filling her heart. "I do," she said, her voice thick with happiness. "Completely, and without any doubt whatsoever. He found me during the darkest, most uncertain moment of my life, and he has shown me nothing but patience and genuine care ever since. I choose him, fully and completely, exactly as he has chosen me." Ophelia smiled warmly, gesturing toward the traditional claiming bracelet resting on a small cushion nearby. Rhett carefully lifted it, his hands slightly trembling with emotion as he gently slid it onto Mara's wrist, the delicate metalwork catching the warm lantern light beautifully. "By the ancient bonds of our kind, and before all gathered here as witnesses," Ophelia announced, "I now formally recognize Rhett and Mara as bonded mates, their connection celebrated and honored by both Ashwood and Blackridge alike." The hall erupted into joyful applause and celebratory cheers, the sound washing over Mara like a warm wave of collective happiness. Rhett pulled her gently into his arms, and this time, surrounded by genuine celebration rather than shocked confusion, he kissed her deeply, sealing their bond completely, before the entire assembled crowd. When they finally parted, both laughing softly with overwhelming joy, Mara caught sight of Elise standing nearby, tears streaming freely down her own face as she watched her sister's happiness unfold. Beside her, Kian offered a warm, genuine smile, clearly moved by the beautiful conclusion to a journey that had begun under such difficult, unexpected circumstances. The celebration continued long into the evening, filled with music, laughter, and joyful conversation between members of both packs, now bound together not simply through political alliance, but through genuine, celebrated love. Mara moved through the crowd on Rhett's arm, accepting congratulations and warm wishes from friends and family alike, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. Later that evening, as the celebration began winding down and guests slowly made their way toward their respective homes, Mara found herself standing quietly with Rhett near the edge of the hall, watching the last of the lanterns flicker gently in the cool night air. 6 months ago, she said softly, I stood in this very hall, certain my chance at happiness had already passed me by. Rhett wrapped his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin softly atop her head. And now? And now, Mara said, turning within his embrace to face him fully. I understand that being overlooked by one person simply meant I was being carefully guided toward someone who would never once take me for granted. Rhett smiled warmly, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. I promise you, Mara, I will spend every single day making certain you never doubt how completely you are chosen, cherished, and loved. As they stood together beneath the star-filled sky, the warm glow of the celebration continuing softly behind them, Mara felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle deeply within her heart. The pain and uncertainty of that first difficult night had long since transformed into profound gratitude, a recognition that sometimes life's most unexpected disruptions lead precisely toward the happiness we never quite believed we deserved. Elise approached them both a while later, her own happiness evident as she embraced her sister warmly, one final time, before the evening concluded. I couldn't be happier for you, she said sincerely. Truly, Mara, you deserve every bit of this joy. Thank you, Mara said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything, Elise, for understanding, for forgiving, for standing beside me through all of it. The sisters shared one final embrace, their bond fully restored and stronger than ever, before Elise finally made her way home alongside Kian, leaving Mara and Rhett to enjoy the final quiet moments of their beautiful celebration together. As the last lanterns finally dimmed and the hall grew quiet around them, Rhett took Mara's hand gently in his, leading her out into the cool night air, toward the beginning of their shared future together. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever adjustments would be required in building a life spanning 2 territories, Mara faced the future now, with complete confidence and unwavering happiness, secure in the knowledge that she had finally found exactly where she was always meant to belong. Behind them, the great hall stood quiet once more, its lanterns extinguished, its flowers beginning to wilt gently in the evening air, silent witness to a story that had begun in heartbreak and unexpected disruption, but had ultimately blossomed into something far more beautiful than Mara could have ever imagined possible on that first difficult night, so many months before.